I don't even think we have to do an intro, or this is the intro right now, but I guess I can say I'm Christopher Ayers.
Oh, and I'm Theresa Hong.
You're in this game.
Oh, and I'm Theresa Hong. It's
But
been a while since I've done a podcast.
Yeah, and I think that maybe you might be assuming that people might know who you are already, which I don't expect people to know who I am because I'm not on Netflix. Which is the lead into this whole thing. I was trying to figure out a way that, like, how are we going to bring this up within the first, 5 minutes when I did it in 30 seconds.
Indeed you did.
Yeah, okay.
Good job.
So yeah, but we have to go off of this. So if I were to take over this is a co-host thing, but if I were to take over as the host for a second, I would say that Theresa Hong, you probably have seen her, maybe, if anywhere, if I had to take the guess where it got blanketed over everybody the most, it would be on a BBC interview about Project Alamo, which was a somewhat now controversial program or operation, or however you want to spin it. It was a bunch of people doing work in a building, just like everybody else. But that's where you might have seen her from. She was on that operation, if you will, I guess. So, but recently they brought that back and put the clip from that interview on Netflix on The Great Hack. So that's what I'm referring to, just to give you a peace of mind if you were, something was nagging at you that you recognized Theresa Hong. Which also, lastly, what I'll say is that's my mom. Yeah.
Yep.
I think I got it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I brought that up okay.
Nope, that's excellent. Excellent.
So I guess I would like to ask you, though, just a general question then, what do you feel about all of it? I know it's not specific, but please, what do you feel about all of that?
Well, it's been a while. So, I'm talking about 2016. I can go back a little bit ways, a ways for that and give you kind of a precursor, because this was something that I never thought in a million years would happen as far as me getting on a presidential campaign. So I'll just give you a little bit of a backstory. Obviously you knew that, Dan and I had been going back and forth, California, this, that, California always seemed like that was kind of our bread and butter place. But, you had come back to San Antonio. We had 2 other kids that were growing up fast here that we did not have in California. And so in 2015, we decided, okay, you know what, it's time to come back. And in California, I was working for a state representative, a senator, and was fired from that position.
That's the best way to go.
Yes, was fired. Yes, because the chief of staff and I did not get along at all. He had his certain ideas and I had mine, and we were like oil and water, and wore oversized suits, which just really got on my nerves. But anyway, so I was fired, and so I said to Dan, I said, you know what, I think it's time that we come back to San Antonio, not because we had no prospects or anything, but it was just, that was kind of my sign from the universe that we needed to come back.
Yeah, and there's a vibe here, and we're getting to that.
Yeah. And so literally with probably about $900 in our pocket, we traveled with the boys, because the boys decided out of nowhere that when we were in San Antonio and we were going back to California, Merced, to pack up and leave, they were like, well, let's go. It'll be a great adventure. And I'm thinking, yes, it's going to be a great adventure, and we have no money. So we came back super, super happy that they were able to, see everybody and meet everybody. We had really created a good family in Merced. And then on our way back, we got back here. We stayed at In-Town Suites, which we affectionately now call the Suites in Town. because it sounded a little bit better.
It's all about attitude.
It is all about attitude. That is exactly right. And immediately got a job with the city of San Antonio. But with that, boy, you talk about mismanagement of money and stuff, man. You're just sitting around there doing nothing. It was insane. As a public information officer, I was not publicly spreading any type of information whatsoever. I mean,
And I think that's the case in a lot of cities, not just San Antonio.
Yeah.
That's kind of.
Yeah. So, and not to diss the city at all.
Not
I
at
mean,
all.
they have, positions to fill. I just so happened to get into this position. Would have been sweet for anybody who didn't want to work, man. But man, I just wanted to slip my wrists when I was there. So, got rid of that. Still staying at the in-town suites, man. Week by week. Selling stuff because we weren't making enough money to do anything. Like, it was crazy. And I'll tell you what will strengthen any type of relationship with yourself and with your partner is staying at the in-town suites for a year, because we were there for a long time. So with the city, and a long story short, I apologize if this is longer, but I just think that it's important. Nobody really understands this story. So.
Well, you could even, real quickly too, you could even say, oh, well, you were in California. It must have been a fault of your own that you weren't doing well, because I think people assume all the housing out there is nice and everything. I got news for you. The Central Valley is a working class place, and they're struggling sometimes through no fault of their own. You have weather issues. It's a very farm type oriented economy around there, so it's not necessarily of a fault of their own, but the demographic there and even the housing market there is not what people think of when they think of California, and that's why there are so many people, in my opinion, and from the data that I've interpreted, that are coming to Texas, to other places, specifically Texas. I think the largest number of new citizens that we're getting are from California. At least the documented one. I'm sure there's some coming from Mexico too. But
they don't want to pay the state income tax and everything else that goes along with it.
Right, and that's just something I wanted to clear up, because that's a misconception right there too.
Yes,
and so you can absolutely struggle even if you live in California.
Yeah. Well, and two, I mean, a lot of it was Dan and I's fault. We didn't save. We didn't expect any of this, and so when it happened, it happened. But it was still.
And you did have good jobs and everything leading up to this, so
Absolutely.
I can see where that mindset comes from.
Yep, absolutely. But I mean, when you look at everything as a gift and a blessing, and not anything bad, your mindset, you definitely do change. And so even with the city, it was a good experience for me just to be able to say, what, I don't want to do this. So then I went to another agency, the Atkins Group, and it was very, very, just kind of traditional advertising, marketing, public relations. And I was really low on the totem pole. And I'll tell you what, I mean, obviously, I've been struggling with, ego and all that kind of stuff, but my ego couldn't handle that. And so I was like, what, now peace out with that. So I left. And then I ended up with Giles Parscale. And maybe some of the people who will view this will know the name Brad Parscale. So Brad Parscale was, at that point, heading up the primary. And it was a small little operation. I mean, it was just him and like one other guy that were doing the primary things. And It was just a little bit of digital media. That's all it was. And lo and behold, Trump won. And we just, I was absolutely amazed. And this was probably about maybe 5 weeks after I had started with Parscale. And it was a Sunday, and it was Grams's birthday, and we were celebrating, and I got a text out of the blue from Brad. And he says, hey, can you work today? I'm working on something that needs to be done quick. And I said, sure, deadline. And he's like, Tuesday. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's a 2016 digital campaign for Trump. And I laughed out loud.
Right. Yeah, I mean.
Because I was just like, okay, you know what? That's going to go to the RNC. Wishful thinking, Mr. Dreamer. And so I wrote a proposal, and we were going back and forth and that kind of thing. And Brad's wife even got involved, Candace. I mean, everybody just kind of had their hands in it and stuff. And so we created this proposal, and then for the next like 5 or 6 days, like going in and out of the office, were just a bunch of, RNC suits, man. Like they were just like going in and just like sticking out like a sore thumb, I mean, wearing freaking like gnarly boat shoes without socks in like the middle of the summer and stuff. And it's like, oh man, they all looked like, what they looked like? They looked like all of the bad preppies in like Pretty in Pink, which is way like probably before, well, it is way before your time, but anyway, they all look
vintage
like that.
now, which is why that style, I would say, is reemerged
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
So, I mean,
like-
surprisingly, I think everybody knows
Polos,
exactly what you're
sweaters,
talking about.
popped collars,
Right.
boat shoes without socks and stuff. It's like, oh gosh. But anyway, so they came in and out and in and out and in and out, and then again, lo and behold, we got the contract.
Right. Well, but that's an interesting kind of point in itself. It could be taken both ways, and I mean that's a big point of, I think, what we're just talking about, and what I want to get across as just a human being to the world. Like, my thing that I want to tell people is that life is just so many little actions and influences from so many different directions that
Sure.
if you peg it as this is what this is at this moment, or this is what I see going on. So for example, oh well, exactly, that's exactly what all those Republican guys look like. Of course they were white privileged boat shoe wearing people, right? But the point is those people, a lot of them coming through RNC, those types of things, and Trump kind of didn't pick that.
Yeah.
He went with a more alternative route. If you look up Brad Parscales, that's just a big bearded dude that does not look like what we're talking about right now. And I think you don't look like what people would think of as a typical, Republican leaning or even center-right person.
I confused people.
Absolutely, and I think that's the greatest thing, is to just get people very confused, get people on those stereotype confusions, because patterns are great, and we recognize a lot, and we protect ourselves, and we do good jobs by identifying some patterns, but it's not like a perfect working system. It's just a system that works, and then our discretion is the thing that really kind of separates all the this is a logical pattern making decision or even assumption from my past
Right.
Events, or this is absolutely ridiculous, which is something like, oh yeah, all Republicans are white privileged, this type of looking person, whatever. And then if you were to say all liberals are like, just weed smoking, hippie, Birkenstock wearing, peace, love people, then you would just be stereotyping another thing. And what I'm saying is, stereotypes, all of this, anything that you try to define as a truth, you need to be very careful that it won't radically change over time.
Right.
Democrats used to be Republicans, Republicans used to be Democrats, which all that is just a differentiating of ideals over time. They just kept the same names, but their ideas changed. So consistency, and I think Alan Watts had said it. He said, what makes something what it is? A college gets built, teachers go in there, those students go in there, learn from those teachers, those students go on, the teachers end up dying or moving on, the building gets renovated, everything changes, the teachers keep going and coming and going, the students keep coming and going. Well, after 200 years, that's not the same university as when it started, but the consistency of keeping it up kind of is. And you have to be a little bit fluid, and you have to be with the change to understand that you can only really hold on to something by letting it change a little bit. And, you're going to get a lot more truth out of life by challenging your own assumptions, making sure that they're correct, because they can be, but also hearing weird stories from weird perspectives. And this is one of them, and this is why I'm so excited to talk to you about it, because it just bashes a lot of stereotypes, and there's a lot of questions that, if people are watching and they'd love to comment them, I'd love to hear some good questions and pick some that you would try to ask my mom to maybe stump her on like some sort of conspiracy type thing, or how many Russians were involved in Project Alamo. You can bring anything you want to it. And what's funny is I remember having communications with my mom on a lot of these days when she was working on this stuff, and it was so overwhelmingly typical. It was like regular work.
Well,
It wasn't.
and going back to the fashion thing and stuff like that, that really isn't Republican or Democrat as much as it is DC.
Very true.
So I just want to clarify that. It's just like everybody dresses like douchebag Blaine and Pretty in Pink in DC for some reason. I have no idea. So yeah, but we'll go back to that. But yeah, so we ended up getting the contract, and I still didn't know if I was going to be working on the campaign or not. And about 10 days later, Brad contacts me, and Brad said, hey, I need a content person. He's like, and I said, sure, be right over. Because I was at their, downtown office, and Project Alamo was in this, oh my gosh, it was definitely not the Trump Tower. The air conditioning would go off and on, and it was just, oh my gosh, it was just insane. But anyway, so I joined, and then, another freaking awesome, blessing and sign of the universe. Then Dan, my husband, your stepdad, then he was hired as, video editor, and just, he was he was just more like video slinger, man. He was it was like the Wild West, as far as him getting shit done for videos and stuff like that. So that was always good. And then people started trickling in, Facebook, the evil Cambridge Analytica, Google, YouTube, Twitter came in for a little bit, but they didn't.
Was your impression of Cambridge Analytica one of, man, these guys are so secretive and I don't even want to bother them, or I don't know what they're doing over there in that room?
Well, honestly, it's kind of a little bit of both, data science and stuff like that. You could walk in there at any time and look at a computer and stuff like that. You just didn't really know what you were looking at, because there was just so much. It was literally a dashboard of data, right? So I didn't know. I'm not a data scientist, The one thing that I think was misconstrued with the BBC interview is that Jamie Bartlett, the guy who interviewed me, he was so hell-bent on getting his story, which I don't blame him, shoot, manipulate and you create your own story and all that kind of stuff. He was so hell-bent on getting his own story that he really failed to listen to what I was saying as far as, look, did we utilize some of the psychographics? Very, very little. Very little. We were more of a fundraising machine than anything else, right? So there was that. And getting back to your question about Cambridge Analytica, I never, the crew that we had was very small in our office. So, there was nothing ever sinister or anything about it.
So if I were to look at this data, I may have a unique interpretation for how to use it.
I don't even know if you could look at that data and interpret anything.
So it might be shots in the dark on some of it.
I don't know. Like I said, according to Cambridge Analytica, they were able to, I wrote it down. It's according to Cambridge Analytica, they had 5,000 data points on each individual, right? Mm-hmm. And data points are basically something that defines that individual. And what they used is they used this thing called OCEAN. And OCEAN is openness, conscientiousness, extrovertness, agreeable, and neuroticism, right? So this is how they, they kind of played on that. But like I said, there were a lot, people think that, oh my gosh, we were doing all of this stuff. Very little of it was happening during the campaign itself. Really and truly, we were tasked with just raising as much money as we could.
Yeah, and that shows, because it shows where your financial backing, as far as advertising, was stronger than, the Clinton campaigns. But not even to put them against each other, it just almost goes back with the data that if you take data from a bunch of people, the time period in which it was taken will absolutely have an effect on how it reads, in my opinion. And I think that if you were to take data from somebody, let's say during a recession, as opposed to somebody during, a great, strong, thriving, free market capitalist society that's doing really great like America, you'd get very different personality. I think that some things would be variables that would almost be impossible to control, I guess is what I'm saying.
You raise a good point. However, what Facebook did, and this is, and Cambridge, and I'll get into Cambridge a little bit, because Cambridge really did, when I found out after the election that Cambridge had, kind of breached and taken data that individuals had not given them permission to, that really sat. I mean, that's egregious. That's disgusting.
It
And I
is.
just,
It's like-
I was super, super upset when I heard that.
They got hungry or something.
And we'll get into that too, but what I'd really like to say, going back to your point, because yes, you raise a good point. However, what Facebook has done over probably the past 10 years is, they've created algorithms to where they can basically tell you, it's not even a certain day or anything, they can tell, for example, advertisers or whatever, not so much anymore because of the 2016 election kind of changed everything, but, what denomination you are. Let's see, like what political, party you affiliate with most, whether you're college educated or not, what kind of food you like, whether you are a vegan, whether you have a preference for keto, all of this different just data and stuff that Facebook has, accumulated. And what I always go back on with Facebook, it's just so funny how, the Trump campaign kind of became the villains. And the Clinton campaign had the exact same tools and the exact same offer as far as Facebook, offering to help them and embed Facebook employees, into their campaign. And from what I understand, they turned it down.
Okay, well, and I see how also, to me, a lot of this has been a really good, it's an ode to democracy, if anything, because when the forefathers wrote the Constitution, it can go both ways. You can say, what a silly, silly document, that we're paying attention to that these old people wrote. But it wasn't that long ago, and here's my point about it. Without having the foresight for this exact event to come up, think about, they didn't even know the internet alone. We didn't know 30 years ago. So we really need to stretch our minds here and just remember not that long ago, or force yourself to understand it if you really need to, because you can't ignore this. So if you go back and look at that, before there was any kind of predecessor to any sort of technology or communication at this level, the forefathers were like, look, I think 4-year terms are good for the president, and I think a max of 2 would be probably gravy. But they're going to have to be reelected. So we'll see how they do after 4 years. Well,
and I'll stop you right there, because that was an amendment later.
It did get added.
Because it got added because Roosevelt kept on getting elected.
Good point. Good point. Well, what did they do for Bill of Rights then? They still had senators as 2 or 4-year?
Well, it depends. Federal, they can go as long as they want. That's how come there's so much corruption, and this is a whole other podcast, but that's why there is so much corruption within our federal, Congress, is because representatives have been voted in for 20, 30 plus years. And
yeah, see, that's where I get confused, because I know there's people that can be like lifers.
Sure.
So when, I guess I should ask this then before I make the point, when then about did we say, okay, there's a limit, there's a cap? You said Roosevelt?
Yeah, for president. Yeah.
For president, okay.
And then state by state, that just depends on the state.
Right, but before that, were there any more than 2-term presidents?
Before that, were there any more than 2? Well, you know what? That's a really good question.
Because that's what I had thought, and I thought that's why even Washington, respectfully came down. He was like, look, I think this amount of time is good.
Yes.
I want to say that they wanted to put him up for another one.
Well, they wanted to make him king.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. But that's what I mean. So let's just use, then we've kind of gotten, you've corrected my information to where I can refine the point. So Washington even having the foresight around that same time to say, and he was part of a lot of the constitutional conventions.
They wanted to get rid of the tyranny. They wanted to get rid of the
Well, he said a few things on his farewell, which one was, hey, stay neutral, try to mind your own business for a while. That'll help your country. But yeah, also then he decided, hey, I'm not going to be your king. I want to leave, let the process go. What I'm getting at, though, is regardless, it was all before the internet when we decided, hey, we need to put a cap on this. And we showed why we need to do this, I guess, before the internet. But now, I guess Trump showed us something where it's almost like we don't have a moral stance or an opinion on steroids yet, let's pretend. But then he was like, whoa, steroids will make you really strong, and I'm going to use them, and I'm going to be so strong, I'm going to hit 1 million home runs. Well, it's kind of like, as soon as you assume, okay, this is taking away something from the natural competition, or you're gaining an advantage that if used correctly, it's almost guaranteed. Like, a little dude can take steroids and get stronger, guaranteed. And I think that's why people have the moral objection, where they kind of just go, this is too easy to win with. You can manipulate people, or you can strengthen yourself to unrealistic proportions in unrealistically small amounts of time. So to get that much traction, for Trump to come on that hard, and then to boom, explode this system, to show people its power, to get people so freaked out that they're like, we can't ever have this ever happen again, we can't let this happen. Well, we had 4 years to talk about it, and guess what? We might not allow that ever again. And the beauty of it is that he didn't get in and just go, I'm the king now, I'm here forever. I use that power that you guys didn't know about. Now I'm stuck. How are you going to get me out? It's like our democracy is even set up for stuff that it doesn't know it's set up for.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, look at the impeachment process. You know, I mean, yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, it's now defunct, but you know, I mean, yeah. I mean, that's your checks and balances. You know,
And things evolve and change over
Yeah.
time. But to me, that's the point I'm trying to make, is that if anything, you know, you get a little more faith, in my opinion, that like we do have some sort of a system that's still trying to work.
Absolutely. No, and I agree with you. You know, it was, you know, it was always very interesting to me. And, you know, and two, like with the Project Alamo stuff and everything, and that BBC interview and everything, you know, it's funny because, I mean, what they have called me, and, you know, I'm flattered. Not flattered with, you know, a lot of the bad things that they've called me, but as far as, you know, the digital content guru and, you know, all that kind of stuff, you know, it's like, wow, that's great. But in the grand scheme of things, you know, nobody won that election but Trump. And the reason why he won it is because he worked harder than anybody else. I mean, he did circles around Clinton, you know. He rolled up his sleeves and he went out and he did the work. You know, I mean, there were times where, I mean, I was absolutely exhausted, you know, and I wanted to like crawl in a corner in a fetal position and just freaking cry
Yeah,
because I was so
remember,
tired. But boy, you know, here was this like freaking 68-year-old man that was getting on a plane from his second rally going to the third rally at midnight with 10,000 people waiting for him, you know, as he got out. I mean, the guy never stopped. So it doesn't matter how many data points we had on people. It doesn't matter about the messaging. It doesn't matter how. He just worked harder than everybody else. And I will tell you, you know, Dan always says this, and I agree with him. You either loved or you hated him. And to this day, you either love or you hate him. At least, you know, he's got such just that visceral, like, you know, like you don't, like you're either like, yes, I love him, you know, he's great, or like, oh my gosh, I can't stand him, you know?
Yeah.
And we couldn't have swayed somebody. This is what's so interesting, that I think the 2016 election has kind of opened up the doors. It's fascinating to me in this great divide, to where you're not going after swing voters anymore, because there are no such thing as swing voters anymore, man.
Yeah.
It's like this or that, right? So I think that good, bad, or ugly, we kind of established that. Right? Now, going back to that, as far as with Clinton, you know, if it would have been Bernie, the rightful Democratic candidate,
Right.
even though he's not a Dem, if he would have been elected, I think that it would have been a much closer, well, it was close as it is, but close. And I'm not quite sure if Bernie wouldn't have won or not.
Yeah.
You know, so with that, my point being, going back to this whole 2016, is that, I mean, society as a whole wanted to break things. It was just one was this extreme and the other was this extreme.
Absolutely.
You know, they didn't want the status quo anymore, you know, and I think people kind of forget about that too. And I think people, which just like floor me, especially the Democrats, you know, how they could forgive Hillary Clinton from basically stealing the election, you know, the primary from Bernie Sanders. And
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders just kind of going along with it, like, okay,
I think it shows a little bit of the lack of recognition for the actual strategy and how you have to play a bit of a game. And I don't mean it in a bad way, because I mean, to me, and I'll touch on the whole, thing that we've been talking about. I try to take a more Zen Buddhist approach to like, what is going on here? What will this look like after I'm gone? Because a lot of times we can interpret history so clearly that that's my best way of not trying to understand or predict the future, but to see what's going on right now. And the biggest thing in this that excites me the most is that great divides create big duality.
And big change.
And that's where truth comes from, though. Real truth comes from two people getting pushed to their extreme so far that they realize how absolutely absurd, one, what they're willing to do for what they believe. Because then they're about to fight each other. And at some point when you're standing across from another human being, you're about to kill each other for something. If you don't at least think about that in some type of way. And I mean, now with all the PTSD and people who come back from war and stuff, it suggests that you think about it at some point in your life. So think about that before you do something crazy. But that duality and taking that Zen perspective, and I'm not advocating it really, I'm just trying to say my opinion on this is I love playing this game. And I love talking about the politics, and I love seeing the strategies and how people are being swayed even. And, you say, oh, I hate that people get manipulated. I get the impression that's what people feel like. But what about persuaded? Well, you get manipulated, it's not for your own good. You get persuaded, someone's trying to help you. Well, you need to be the judge of that. When are you getting manipulated? When are you getting persuaded? You don't trust the person who's either persuading or manipulating you. You need to figure that out. But the last thing I'll say about that is that's the sweet part about Trump. Because it's up to the people now to interpret him. And he does say things where you're like, man, I'm glad that he was sitting across from Putin and talking shit. Because do you want that job? Do you want to go talk to Putin? Do you want to have to strong arm that shit? Because I guarantee you people don't want this kind of power and control. And if they did, they'd have to look at themselves with that same judging of like, what a narcissist, what a crazy person. But to me, I just like to add that in there. That's my real kind of philosophy behind all of this, is that somewhere in this, there's a lot of innocent victims that are dividing themselves and fighting for the sake of the overall truth. The polls always have that kind of meeting there where there's a truth.
No, that's a great point, and to add on to that point, it's really interesting because I think that the powers that be, and I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat or I just think that the people who have been running our government for years and years and years and years and years, that's why you're seeing all of this tribalism. That's why you're seeing all of these groups and these group thinks and all that kind of stuff. Because to your point, it's not even about individuals on polar opposite ends. Now it's about groups. So they know that there is, again, going back even to, Cambridge Analytica. And again, like I said, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. They're smart enough to know that, if we get people lumped into groups and they start to group think and, we make one point of view popular and the other point of view, you're evil, that kind of thing, then more people are going to go over to, the more popular group. I mean, that's just the way that it's been since, day one, right? If we got away from that and if we started breaking that mold and if we started just like what you said, you get this like polar opposite, but instead of looking at groups, coming to just like what we were talking about at the very beginning, DC, looking all like Blaine's from, Pretty in Pink, right? So if we got away from these groups and if we really started meeting as individuals, I think it would be a lot better.
And I think even to go off of that, the way in which you become an individual, my problem with right now is that the process has been reversed in my eyes. So what they did is they told you, well, you're just Americans, or you just, you're here. Welcome to the talk. Now, don't you guys care about stuff? Like, you have morals, right? So then people go, yeah. and then they break you down into smaller groups. So are you more of like LGBT? Is that what you want to focus on? Or would you rather focus on like this civil rights issue? Or are you more of like world hunger? Are you more of like, no, you know what? I like my free market capitalism. You know, people will take care of themselves if they're given the opportunity.
Right.
Envy is the root of all evil, not
Which
greed.
is fairly evil these days.
Right. But the thing is that those types of, I guess even those questions should be questions that you address as an individual first, and then what you realize is you can start making groups based on things that you like, that you relate with other people.
Yeah,
So
goodness. I mean, I've never been, I'd never experienced anything like after the BBC interview when people just started, literally hating me because I worked for Trump.
Yeah.
Hated me and automatically put me in these groups, automatically assumed that, oh, well, if she's pro-Trump, then she is, anti-gay, or she is anti-abortion, or she is, like all of these, just crazy lumping yourself into these things. That's why I think groups are so dangerous.
Right.
And they know that that's how you control a population, is within those groups, right? But going back to that, never in my life had I experienced being hated.
Yeah, that was like true hatred.
Because, death
you
threats.
could feel it through the
being hated because of my political affiliation.
Right.
Woo, man,
And not even like a super open one at that. Not like I guess you were open, but the word should be, you weren't overly enthusiastic for no reason with Trump bumper stickers. It wasn't like it just turned on a dime. You got a job and you just went, oh my God, I'm going to owe everything I have to this man.
Honestly,
so,
well, and
let me, no fanaticism there.
Well, let me get back to that. Number one,
logical.
yes, and number one though, let me get back to that. Number one, the more that I found out about Hillary Clinton and things of that nature and all that kind of stuff, the more that I did want to. I was like, oh man, like she can't win, okay? And that'll be a whole other podcast one of these days. But number two, Trump did change my world because we were still living at the in-town suites when we were hired for that election. He really gave us, he and Brad Parscale, he gave us the platform to be able to go, okay, you know what? We're set. We're good.
Right.
We're secure. I mean, we're like, wow, we can get an apartment again. We can do all of this stuff. We can start, we can take a breath, and just like a sigh. So for that, man, I owe Trump and Parscale, the world as far as I'm concerned, because they gave ours back to us.
Right. And that's a great thing. I think people do need to hear that gratefulness comes from wherever it comes from. There's no moral guideline or something you hold in your pocket all the time and reference and go, well, you can't be grateful there because you work for this person, because it isn't mine. Well, so it's like, that's something that I think people would not maybe sympathize with you or empathize with you and go, oh, wow, good for you, you got a job. But that's what I'm saying. If that was your reaction, then think about that shit.
But that's interesting that you say that because, again, with that, no, I mean, there were people that were just basically, these were friends of ours, basically, how could you? You have no morals. You're complicit. You've basically, stabbed us and America in the heart.
And the way those people talk about you and the way they made you look out to be, as well as like lumping you in with the majority, the smaller than, Hillary's, or the slightly smaller advantage, I should say, than Hillary's camp had of the percentage of the popular vote, right?
Yeah.
So he got that by just a little.
Well,
they say
he didn't get popular. He got the electoral.
But what was the 70,000 difference that they referred to?
Hillary was that's all the electoral. Hillary destroyed in the popular vote.
Okay.
And the reason why that works that way is because all of the concentrated areas are blue. All of the big population areas are blue. Think about it, LA, New York, San Francisco, like all of them. I mean, Texas is turning rapidly, blue now. I would say it was purple. So that's why with the popular vote, but going back to, what you were talking about with, the forefathers, our founding fathers, they had anticipated that too. They wanted representation. They wanted, fair representation. And so that's why they created the Electoral College, is so that people in, Timbuktu, Wyoming would have the same impact as all of the freaking millions of people that live in LA. Do you know what I mean?
That's a great point, yeah.
So going back to, what you were saying is that Hillary won the popular.
Okay.
But Trump won the electoral.
Then how close, I guess, was the popular?
See, and that really kind of depends too. I mean, because it just,
there was different polling and stuff that we'd
well,
always see,
and
and I never
thing.
understood what one is the actual
Well,
one to look at to go, well, I can interpret this data.
2016 is going to go down in history, and I think that it's just going to be one of those things that people are going to look back on, for years and years and years to come. Because, you had accusations of voter fraud. You had accusations of, people who had been dead for 10 years voting. You had, like, all of these different things. You had the Russian collusion. You have all of this stuff that hasn't necessarily been proven yet, right?
I also think that the data was somewhat it's not that it was misinterpreted even maniacally, but a lot of it, like, people don't understand how you set up an experiment for margin of error for things of like that nature in just polling in general. So to a person who wasn't as involved as you, if I were just to see it on TV or see this, that, and the other, I could see how it would have looked crazy when everyone's going, yeah, well, Hillary's projected to win. I mean, people were saying like even 90% at the end. So I think people just went, what the hell?
Well, I'll tell you another thing, and that's another thing that, I'm sure people will be looking at, for years and years to come too, is that this was the first time ever in 2016 that, your traditional style of polling, which is, phone calls and door-to-door canvassing, that kind of thing, that's kind of going down the wayside now, right? And so there are other mechanisms to poll. So your traditional polling, it's like you couldn't really go on that. And two, and I don't know if this is necessarily good or bad, but people didn't want to admit that they were voting for Trump. People just didn't, and just, I don't know if it was like the backlash that they were going to receive. I have no idea, what their thought process was. But yeah, I mean, the polling, that's why it was just so wonky, because people weren't necessarily telling, the truth as far as who they were voting for. There were people that hadn't voted in years and years that were voting because they wanted to vote for Trump. Right. I mean, it just, so it was unprecedented. This election was just absolutely unprecedented. And that's why I am so excited being, looking from just now the outside, just in as a complete outsider for 2020, because I'm not going back. I'm never doing politics again. And just to see how, number one, the Facebook rules and regulations and how, those changed just because of the election, how they're going to kind of work around that. Just how the campaigns are going to be, the Democratic they're already starting their freaking primaries, and it's not 2020 yet. I mean, it's just amazing to me, and it's amazing about how much mudslinging there is, and that the Dems they can't decide, whether they are progressives or whether they are moderates or whether they are like so far on the left, as far as, socialists that, I mean, I've never seen like a more freaking like diverse just panel of candidates that have so many just different ideas and things like that. And I think it's super interesting. I don't agree with them. I don't agree with a lot of them, but to your point, it's interesting because it's like, wow, man, this is the type of shit that brings on great change.
It created an
I
efficacy
don't know if
that's
that's
actually
good or bad or whatever, but you know what? It's changed.
Well, I
and
think
so we'll see.
I think that goes back to what we said in the beginning. It's just attitude. So my suggestion, this whole conversation has kind of put me in this perspective here that I'm just about to say, but it was I couldn't see this 2016. I mean, we're not far enough away from it to have the full kind of like retrospective on it, but I feel like I have a little bit more of that. Mm-hmm. And what I'm getting out of it is that there was so much craziness in 2016 that what we should do is just say, you know what? We're like spooling up and just going up on a crazy path. What if we took 2016 as the year that changed everything? We all admit it. We all go, wow, shit got wild. And what if we kind of start over from here? What if we don't keep on this extreme of like, well, I'll tell you in 2020 if it doesn't change, I'm going to fucking move to Canada. We're all going to die.
And I'll tell you why.
It's like, let's stop it.
And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you at least my theory on why. Is because there were issues ranging from civil rights to white supremacy to misogyny to all of this different things that everybody thought, I think, for some reason had already been addressed and taken care of.
Great
right?
point.
They
Yes.
already, oh man, it had just been like buried. Oh well, we'll make a law up and we'll make it, illegal for this, for that, blah 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 blah. Trump came in because Trump is so, abrupt and, he says what he thinks and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that it's right, but, he does have a very brash way of speaking. And so automatically he gets labeled, which I think I'm labeled now, Dan's labeled as, racist, misogynist, Islamophobe, gay hater, like the whole 9 yards, right? Right? Okay. My point being is that nobody can go at this point in time because there are issues that, like I said, people just fell asleep on, but they were always there. Trump has brought them up again. Good, bad, or ugly, Trump has forced us to address this, and that is where this great divide is happening, and the opportunity for everybody to come together, not as fucking groups, but as individuals, to sit there and talk and be able to understand, okay, well, what is, what are your struggles? What is this? Please help me understand. That kind of thing. We've never had that. We really haven't. And this is the first time that it has, but it's just like, it's like a 12-step freaking program, like recovering alcoholic, anger, denial, I don't know all the steps or whatever, but we are in this weird freaking, like just sustainable, like it's just like anger denial stage. Yeah. I don't know when we're going to be able to get out of that.
Well, right, but see, you'll always be, that's what I kind of mean, is like as long as we recognize certain stages and stuff, we're missing some of the truth that is the present. And just basically, this happens in anything you try to master too. You always understand it. Just like when you understood first grade math, you understood it. Then you got to second grade and you're like, oh, there's another level to this. I thought I understood math. Well, you do, but you just didn't understand it to this level. So you revisit things that you think you understand. Mm-hmm. What was it, Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain? It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just isn't so. Mm-hmm. And it's like as soon as you say, I'm a master. Oh, I understand everything about, women's rights. Oh, I understand where women need equality. I get it. Well, you're already encapsulating one time right now. You might have a different opinion tomorrow. And I'm not saying, change your mind all the time. But what I'm saying is that's not a hard thing to kind of compensate for in your head of just saying, I know when to say I don't know. And I know when to say, I don't quite have enough data yet. I don't quite have enough information.
And you just nailed why so many people dislike Trump. And you know what's so funny is that they don't even know why they dislike, he's a misogynist, he's racist, he says, but you just nailed it. You nailed it. His thing is, I know everything. His thing is I can solve everything. I've got, that kind of thing. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But it rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Well,
because like what you say, and what I believe as well, is that, you never know. You know, but on the other end of the spectrum, you never know.
Well, Trump is like seeing your ego on steroids. You're like seeing a thing that you're capable of within your own humanity, but you're always like, no, I'm not going to go there because I have some sort of, but you never thought the full thing through.
Right.
That's just the thing. And that's why I think I like him sometimes. That's why I also like sometimes I'll hear stuff that I say and I'll think back and go, ooh, that was a little too harsh. But sometimes I like it. Sometimes I go, I really don't like the way I did that. And I change it in the future. And that's part of us being a human. And also, as Jordan Peterson would say, giving us room to just fail and just mess up sometimes. And society should be there to remind everybody, let's hold each other responsible, not accountable. Because, oh my God, if everybody was like on camera all the time and people were just like watching and tweeting you and going, oh, I just saw you picking your nose. Oh, don't do that. Oh, I don't like that. It would just get to the point where you would be more worried about fucking up, so you'd be frozen. And then you never get anything done. And I think, one, if you want to talk conspiracies, that's one of them. Two, what I'll go back to, and I have a weirder view. I like what you say about they get us into smaller and smaller weird groups to ruin the chance of us ever becoming individuals. But I'll take it one step further, and this is where I go a little crazy, but I like to go here. I think they're reversing the process of how you truly become an individual, which you normally become an individual by experiencing your own joys, your own passions. You pursue what interests you, even if it doesn't make sense. You find other people who maybe do the same thing as you. I mean, skateboarders hang out with smaller groups of skateboarders because they love all the skateboarders, but now they've gotten to choose with some of them that are more, they see more of themselves in there. So what I'm saying is when you develop yourself as an individual from the beginning and kind of go out into the world with it, then you can kind of tweak it and you can join groups as you need to, but you can always go, whoa, I need to go back to being that individual. This group's going too far. What I'm saying is they're trying to give you the idea that you're an individual without any work. So you're already an individual. Now go join groups that match your interests. So what I'm saying is you're not doing the work. You're already being lumped into groups based on weird things like your race, your sexuality, which is baffling. Why who you love is a group that's willing to be. I get the sacrifice of fighting for it when dumbass people don't understand and they're meeting you with so much resistance that you're almost willing to do anything to be yourself. And I'm not trying to downplay that. But what I am saying is that the more we hang on to them and the more we allow this process to happen this way, we don't have the same power that a true individual has. And what they're doing is they're going to make you individuals by the process of excluding everybody else. And then you realize that, oh, I'm so me, I'll never be understood. And then that's what they don't want you to know. That's when they've already killed all of your spirituality, all of your essence of anything that anybody that was trying to explain something beyond what this game is. They were trying to tell you that your consciousness, my consciousness, Dan's consciousness, it's all one big thing that we're all producing. And it's not even, we are all the same. And I don't mean that in a human way. I mean that in a molecular states of matter. We all are really the same. And there's philosophies that as we go on could encompass these things and remind people that every single day they can always go back to that essence. It's not your body, it's not your skin, it's not who you are, it's not your job, it's not your clothes, it's not any of that. It's something so much more profound, and it's there for everybody to access. But to me, that's what they're really doing, is they're trying to make you such an individual that you'll just never understand that there's no such thing as groups, there's no such thing as tribes. Those are all fun things that we do. Those should be fun. But the truth should not be found in any of those things. We all have it. Everything that I'll ever know comes from me or some sort of information that I found that came from someone else who at one time didn't know it, who heard it from someone else who at one time didn't know it. And a great example is Tesla right here, because he's one of the few people that will explain that a lot of his inventions just came to him and he just drew them right there in the sand. So there's people out there that are receiving information that are trying to contribute. And by just turning all of that off, by turning people like Tesla into crazy people, that's what they're doing. And they're saying, yeah, group up, find people that are like you, because you're so cool. You want to find other people that are like you. But these are all time period things. These are all silly. You're living within time periods. And that to me is just, you're going to miss a whole philosophy of life that could give you some peace when you go home, and that could give you a oneness with your neighbor, so you're not so fucking scared of them every time you come home.
Right. Well, but see, that's again, that's why I say, as far as the group thing is very, very purposely designed, because basically it's like that gives you the illusion that you're an individual, but really it's not, and then it's causing people not to connect, on that subconscious level, which is a whole other podcast, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think we should probably wrap this one up.
Well, we've set a great ground floor for what all of this will be, but yeah, I mean, it was good just to riff on a lot of this stuff, and we did kind of get some points for the future. And I think, honestly, if we want to say that this was a more of a political focus, just to answer some people's questions, I wouldn't mind even calling it that, because I feel like I've gained a good perspective from a lot of the other side of this great hack documentary on Netflix, and I don't know if that's being offered right now, so I think we should just call it that.
Absolutely. And and before I do that, I wanted to say about the great hack and stuff like that, I just want to say that people should be concerned about data. People should be concerned about the Facebooks and the Googles and those big, the Amazons. I mean, they should be concerned about that, because they do have access to everything. We have willingly
concerned.
Yes, intelligently concerned. We've willingly just completely and totally released our data to for the world to see. People wonder about the ocean, with the optimism and all that kind of stuff. I mean, when somebody's posting 3 times a day about how depressed they are and what meds they're on, or I hate my job, or hey, you know what, I'm great, and I love Tony Robbins, that kind of stuff. Of course, we're gonna know what we're going. I don't like to assume, but we're going to see what these people are made out of. And don't kid yourself. They're Facebook, all those platforms, they're taking that data and they're doing whatever they want with it. And so I just want to say, for that great hack, I thought, I admire the guy who's doing this, and I admire the guy going over and challenging Cambridge Analytica. I admire that. And I think that people need to be aware of what he's bringing forward. But we must all be accountable and take fucking responsibility for what we are putting out and what we are sharing. We have to be very, very cognizant of Facebook's not our friend. Google's not our friend. Amazon's not our friend. So if I can end there, and then we can talk about stuff more down the line, I just want to say that,